It never fails that every time I do a deep dive of one of these value brand guitars, in other words, these guitars that have a lot of features, but they don't hit the pocketbook that hard, you guys always find another one and tell me in the comments, this is great, but have you tried this one? And today's brand was so inexpensive, I had trouble finding it for the right price. This guitar by Jet Guitars sells for $249. However, everywhere I looked on the internet, everyone wanted $350, $375 new. Used, they wanted $250 to $275. It was very hard to find, which tells me this might be a good deal. Okay, so Phil from editing here. Real quick, I just want to let you know, I did reach out to Jet Guitars. And I did have a bunch of email correspondence about this because I let them know. I said, look, I'm not finding this guitar very easily for $249. What ended up happening is, I'm going to read you this part. This is the important part. It says, thank you for finding the listings with the incorrect prices. We've now spoken to the dealers involved, and it seems they were genuine errors and are now being corrected. Okay, so I just want to let you know that's what they sent. So let's get into the geeky stuff. This is the Jet 400 model, and obviously it's a Stratocaster. So let's just start there. Every time I do an in-depth look at a guitar that looks like a Fender Stratocaster, Telecaster, or precision-based guitar, somebody always comments, how did they get away with this without being sued? Fender tried to trademark the body shapes for the Stratocaster, the Telecaster, and the P-Bass in the early 2000s. And in 2009, the U.S. Trademark Trial and Appeal Board ruled against Fender, saying that the company had not proven that the body shapes had acquired distinctive trademark status since many others had been making near identical designs since the 1970s. The Stratocaster, the Telecaster, and the Precision body shape are public domain in the United States. And in 2019, Fender also lost those trademarks in Europe. However, in Europe and the US, no one can copy the Fender headstock or call their guitar a Stratocaster Strat, Telecaster Tele, or Precision Bass, but the body design is fair game. Of course, the first thing you're probably going to notice is the neck is roasted. So what does that even mean? Usually how it's done is they're going to vacuum out all the oxygen out of the oven and they're going to cook it. What that does is that pulls all the moisture and the sugars in the wood out, making the wood very dry. See, I like my steak like this, but I like my guitar like that. But also giving the neck the feel of something that's been aged for a long time. Some people like it just because the way it looks. Some people like it for its qualities. What I can tell you is, overall, I like it for the aesthetics. I think it's an absolute no-brainer when it comes to making inexpensive guitars where you can't let it air dry out for years. I've heard some people say that some of these are fake roasted necks. And the one thing I want to show you, or whether or not they stained it to look roasted, we can look inside these holes right there and you can absolutely see the color of the wood is consistent all the way down that hole. So it is the same color all the way through to the bottom. So again, we know that if they stain the neck, they wouldn't be able to stain it all the way through. And we can also verify that by taking out the nut and looking underneath, and you can see, again, it's roasted all the way through. What we have here is a basswood body. So the guitar is gonna feel really light, 6.97 pounds or 3.160 kilograms. So obviously pretty light, and that's a double fold issue because you have the basswood, and of course roasting the wood lightens the wood as well because again, the moisture in the sap is pulled out of the wood. One of the downfalls of basswood is that it's very soft. Because it's so soft, even when you paint it, it easily dents or chips, as some of you guys know. The reason is the wood's so soft that when you hit it, the wood dents in, and of course the paint does not want to flex, so therefore it chips off or cracks. However, both Eddie Van Halen and John Suhr have both said that they like the resonant quality of basswood, especially paired with a maple top. We also have 3 pickups. We have a humbucker and 2 sequel coils. They are marked as ceramic. We'll check that out. These are ceramic magnets right here that are just glued onto the bottom of the pickups. And you have your PCB 5-way switch and of course 2 250K potentiometers with a capacitor for the tone control. Does that mean these pickups will sound bad? Well, we'll have to see. We'll have to listen to them. And no shielding in the cavity. So let's take a look at this for the resistance. Looking at the bridge, we're coming in at 7.22K. The neck is coming in at 4.64 and the middle is 4.83. Let's look at the inductance. We're coming in at 3.36 on the bridge, 2.70 on the neck, and 2.71 on the middle. One thing that you can do to make pickups inexpensive, regardless of what type of wire whether it's enamel or a Farvarv or whatever, and the thickness, 43 gauge, 42 gauge, 44 gauge, those are all factors for sure. Absolutely. However, when we see the resistance is very low like this, we usually know that they've been underwound. In other words, they don't have a whole lot of wire on them. And that's fine when you're making pickups, because that sometimes, as you know, is done purposefully to give you more of a vintage sound. However, one thing you do to make a pickup very inexpensive is you don't wind it very heavy on wire, because the copper wire is rather expensive, especially when you're breaking it down to per piece unit times, let's say 1,000 or 10,000 units. And since ceramic magnets are very inexpensive, you can put a more powerful ceramic magnet. So one thing I want you to take notice to, how big these ceramic magnets are. They're pretty huge. Basically, it's done by design. These numbers, none of this is shocking to me. This is usually what you see. When you see a really large ceramic magnet on a pickup, you see that they underwound it, because again, they're trying to find this spot where the pickup's gonna sound good with the materials and keep the cost down. You have a 2-point tremolo system right here, so it makes it a little easier to stand to versus the 6-screw tremolo system. You have bent saddles. This is pretty much like a Fender. All right, so we have 22 nickel silver frets, and you have a synthetic nut. Then we have 6 standard tuning keys. These are labeled as jet, and they are non-locking. They don't lock, so there's no feature there. Not all tuners are equal. The real value of the tuner is not only the construction, but again, the design. So for instance, like a 12-to-1 or 18-to-1 gear ratio is a big deal. The higher the number, so 18-to-1, 18 turns on the tuner to get 1 wrap around the string. Why that matters, the higher the number is, the higher the number, the more finite, and it means more turns you have to do, but also the more finite you can make that tuning and get it dialed in right on the spot. And sometimes you notice that when your gear ratios are really low, like a 10-to-1 tuner, what you'll notice is, if you have a really nice tuner, you'll notice the needle jump a lot. And especially if there's nothing binding in the nut, or the gear isn't sloppy, or the head on the tuning key isn't slopping, what you'll notice is that it jumps because you kind of like pass it, right? You can't get that sweet spot when you have a higher gear ratio. So the point of this is to say that not only the quality of the tuners matter, but also the gear ratios. These tuners they're fine, okay? Again, just nothing special about them, but no defects that I could tell. Again, we'll know more when we play the guitar. Like we said, we have the roasted neck. This is a 1-piece roasted neck with a separate piece of maple for the fretboard. Looking here, we have flat sawn neck, so it's flat sawn. One thing I couldn't figure out is where the guitar was made. I took the guitar entirely apart and there's no markings whatsoever. However, when I looked it up on the internet, it says jet guitars are designed in Slovenia and manufactured in China. But again, that's just what it says on the internet. Nowhere is it marked on the guitar like that. But let's talk about a cool positive, the back design. I love that they're using 4 furls instead of a neck plate. I love how this is rounded off, and I love this cutaway right here. This is definitely cool. When you hold the guitar, we call this the handshake. We hold the guitar right there. It feels pretty good. It's really nice and comfortable. Nothing's poking you right there. I feel like I have access, especially because of that angle. Look at that. And that is a huge improvement on the guitar. Now keep in mind, we're talking about an entry-level guitar, and then we're worried about how high up the fretboard you can get. But, it's still a great design, a really cool, well thought out thing, and it really doesn't cost them a whole lot of time and money to do that, so it makes sense that they did it. Other things to note is that you get the tremolo arm, you get an inexpensive guitar cable, and you get the Allen wrenches with the guitar. You see you have 1 string tree, and the string tree is for your E and B string. Okay, so we have it tuned up. Let's see how they have it set out of the box. Okay, so looking at the neck, we have very little relief in the neck. Okay, looking at the action at the 12th fret, we're coming in at 1.75 millimeters on the low E, 1.5 on the high E, B, D, G. A is 1.75. Actually, we're gonna make that D 1.75 and the G 1.75. So really, it's only the high E that's at 1.5. So 1.75, which if you guys know, they usually ship guitars with 2 millimeters off the 12th fret as the action. So this is a little low for that. So we'll go ahead and check to see how the frets, because again, the action is good. So if the frets are good, it should play well. Let's go ahead and see if there's any high frets. So we'll go ahead and play them and give them a listen. Here we go. So that looks good. So now that we went ahead and we checked the frets, we don't have any dead frets. Dead frets means dead notes. In other words, a fret that's high or a fret that's low that's causing the next fret to seem high. No issues there. The frets also look, which is very important, very, very glassy and polished. So a little bit of time put on that, and you can usually tell just by pushing down and doing some vibrato with your hand. Let's go ahead and do a sock test. The treble side first. And these are obviously sticking out a little bit because you can feel and hear it right now. We go here, look at that. So that's definitely like a 2.5 to a 3 out of 5. And we'll go over, let's do the bass side. And the bass side, actually pretty close, but not as bad, but definitely there as well. But I'll say on that one, that's more of a 3.5 to a 4 out of a 5. We'll definitely give that a 3.5 for sure. This is where you're gonna say, hey, you said the neck is roasted. If they dried out the neck so well, how could the neck continue to shrink? Sometimes if the neck shrinks and the frets are popped out, they actually pass the sock test, and here's why. Because if the frets are really polished and rounded over, there's nothing for the nylon to catch onto. So I've had it happen, so you guys know, where the frets were not protruding out, in other words, the neck had not shrank, but it was really bad on the sock test. And I've had it where the frets, you could definitely feel that they had popped out, but they weren't scratching anything. So that's what's kind of happened here. But the frets feel really rounded on the tops. The top of the frets feel really good. But yeah, I can feel all the barbs. Let's do some measurements. First, let's go ahead and check the nut. The nut is coming in at 42.46 millimeters or 1.671. And the width of the neck at the 12th fret is 52.19 or 2.054. Looking at the depth of the first fret, we're coming in at 21.77 millimeters or 0.857. And the thickness of the 12th fret is 22.87 millimeters or 0.900. All right, a couple things I want to show you is first the body. Let's take these furls out. And one thing you'll notice, we say sometimes these inexpensive guitars are referred to as fast guitars. In other words, they put them together fast. They put these together so fast that all the dust, watch this, just give you an idea how fast they're working. I mean, look at that. They don't even have time to clean that out. This is a good time to talk about the way it feels. This is a really nice, comfortable feel. The edge is not very rolled, but it's not harsh and sharp. It just hasn't been rolled like a vintage instrument, so you will feel the edge a little bit, but it is soft. It doesn't cut into your hand. It's definitely a Fender C shape, and they've definitely, I mean, if I grab it, I'm gonna say a 90s era Strat, which is what you feel until the professional series Strats. And yeah, absolutely. So if you like the modern Fender C shape, that's exactly what this neck is. The thing to mention is it has a dual action truss rod, so we can adjust the truss rod so we can give it some back bow or forward bow. And this is where I just realized the output jack's on the side, not on the front, like a normal Strat. How did I not notice that? And this is a good time to mention that if you missed a detail or if there's something we didn't put in the edit, you'll see it on our scorecards that we have a downloadable link down in the description where you can see all the details of this guitar, including the fact that it was a 25.5-inch scale and a 9.5-inch radius fretboard. So with all that in mind, let's go ahead and take it in the studio. We'll play it. I'll give you some feedback on the pros and cons of the guitar afterwards. Things the guitar needed. The intonation was slightly out, so I adjusted that. And the nut was cut right, but it definitely needs some kind of lubricant or something in the slots because the strings would bind a little bit because the nut material is not as hard as bone or graphite. If you get aggressive with the tremolo, it's going to fall out of tune, and it's a combination of just that nut binding a little bit. The tuners have a little bit of slop in them. I don't find any issues with the actual bridge itself though. The bridge seems to be returning to the correct position every time. Some of that could be corrected if you just deck the bridge against the body and then let it float. Let's go ahead and start. Today I'm using a Boss Katana. This is a 50-watt amp. I have it mic'd up with a Sennheiser E609. And we're gonna start with the middle and neck pickup because it's a Strat, and I think that's a good spot to start with. And we'll just play the cleans, go through the pickups, and then I'll switch to an overdrive. Let's go to neck position. One thing that I think will shock you, at least shock me, is the position 2, which is the bridge and middle, sound really good. I want to give you that in the clean sound because I think that's one of the really sweet spots of the guitar. So what I've done now is I've switched over to the brown sound on the amp. I don't have the gain all the way up. It's about halfway. We're going to start on the bridge because that's the humbucker. Let's go ahead and neck pickup. Okay, now we have the middle and the neck position. Here we go. Pros and cons. I'm not a fan of these tuning keys. They're not necessarily bad or defective. They're just not really good. Of course, a far cry better than some of the ones you saw on guitars 30, 40 years ago, but still, these do not kind of give you a sense of confidence. The nut is okay, but at least it was cut correctly, and I think that's because of the fact that they seem to have a good quality assurance department, so where they made sure that that was done well. I know that the sock test gave it like a 2.5 to 3. I was able to polish the ends and round them off on the sides very quickly. As you know, I have a lot of videos. You click down the link down below if you want to check those out. I would say it was a minimal effort, and although that's not a positive on the guitar, I'm just saying that they weren't as bad as they could have been. The rest of the work being level and polished well, that was definitely more important because it's a lot more work to level frets than to just round the ends. The bridge is actually a plus for me. I think it's a pretty good bridge and I like it better than some of the Squier bridges I've come across. Pickups and electronics are usable. Some people say these things feed back. I got it pretty loud and I was not getting mine to feed back, but the louder you get, there is a harshness in the tone of the pickups that is just not as desirable. So again, that's a weak link on the guitar. So again, weak links are tuning keys, pickups, the nut kinda, and then the fret sprout. So what are the positives? This neck is fantastic. It's actually better than the Fender roasted neck guitar that was $2,000 that I reviewed a few months ago. I would prefer this neck way over that Fender neck, and not only the way it feels in the carve, but just the overall quality. The body I really like. I love this contour. I like the feel. I like the output jack being on the bottom. That's kind of unique and fun. And overall, I like the feel of the guitar. And the color is a really cool version of Seafoam Green. Let me know if you'd like to see other Jet guitars on the channel or what guitar you'd like to see a deep dive next. Put it in the comments down below. I really appreciate that. As always, I want to thank you for hanging out to the end of the video. Till the next time, know your gear.